Alright guys, the moment has finally come. Drake has put his best foot forward in his most blatant attempt at making a comeback since the gargantuan loss that he took to Kendrick Lamar just 2 months ago. Kendrick fans finally have enough data to accurately discern whether or not Kung Fu Kenny officially put the nail in the coffin on Drake's career, and Drake fans finally have enough decent music to not be completely embarrassed about being an OV-ho. Now, Drake didn't just put out one track, he didn't just put out 2 tracks, he's actually put out over 10 tracks since Kendrick Lamar obliterated him with the nuke that was not like us. He's done R&B, he's done songs with Sexy Red, he's rapped, he's done house music, he even did a parody record to the song Hey There Delilah, which he actually just performed live. Leaving fans confused on what direction Drake truly wants to take, and due to this confusion, Drake hasn't seemed to land another hit record of the magnitude that his music had before beefing with Kendrick. And as a result, it seems like Drake is adopting the strategy of throwing a bunch of things at the wall and seeing what sticks, giving us more unreleased content, music, photos, studio sessions than we've ever gotten from Drake in his entire career. Now we're gonna unpack every single thing that Drake recently released, all the songs, disses, studio sessions, memes, subliminals, every single piece of content and music that Drake has released will be unpacked within this video.
There's a lot of little nuggets in both of their disses that if it wasn't for these breakdowns, and salute to, guys like this, Rapaholics, because I think they directly get it.
But let's start with how he released it, because ever since losing the battle to Kendrick Lamar and losing his Spotify streaming record of most streams in a single day to Kendrick's diss record Not Like Us, Drake has seemed to have some sort of beef with Spotify, claiming that they're unfairly pushing Kendrick's music while unfairly kind of blacklisting his. And in an attempt to possibly avoid having his new music flop on the charts, Drake has released all of his new music in very, very unconventional ways. So it all started early on the morning of August 6th when fans noticed Drake was following this strange private Instagram account that had like 2 followers. The name of the account was Plot Twist, and sure enough, it was a plot twist because just a couple hours later, the account went public, and on the account, there were hundreds of photos, sneak disses, memes, hints at what Drake's future plans are, behind the scenes footage, and 3 new songs. And again, we'll break down everything in this video, but it is interesting to know that Drake decided to come back and release new music using a fake Instagram account, or a Finsta. Because just a year ago, the same exact thing happened with Kendrick Lamar. Fans noticed there was this random account called Jojo Ruski, and it had a bunch of pictures and videos of Kendrick Lamar just living his day-to-day life. But since fans found the account, Kendrick hasn't posted on it in over a year. RIP Jojo Ruski. But it's interesting that Drake decided to use the exact same strategy to roll out his new music by posting it on a private Instagram account with no real announcement. Fans noticed that Drake also followed another weird private Instagram account called Indigo Child 369, and this account had barely any followers, so people thought, maybe this was another fake account that Drake made that he would reveal some new music on. And the account had a very weird bio. It said, "First account made some people anxious. Here we go again, round 2. Fight." So if the first account had Drake releasing new music, would this second account be him releasing new diss tracks? It's hard to say, but this account was tagged in a photo of 2 women. So this Instagram account might not belong to Drake, it might just be some random girl that he knows. But let's dive into the music that we did receive, because there's a lot to unpack here. Starting off with the fact that Drake really makes direct reference to Kendrick's diss song Not Like Us, as Kendrick devotes the entire 3rd verse of that record to dissect Drake's relationship with Atlanta rappers and compares Drake's tendencies to collaborate with them when they're hot, to use their slang, their lingo, their production, their flows, their melodies, their verses, their hooks, incorporates that aesthetic and that sound into his own music, but then stops collaborating with them if they lose momentum. Basically just leveraging a culture that he's not a part of for his own benefit. And Kendrick relates that same exploitative approach that Drake takes to collaborate with Atlanta artists to how slave owners back in the 1800s had used slaves to build railroads and trains and make their own pockets fatter. And he ends the song off by saying, "You run to Atlanta when you need a few dollars, you're not a colleague, you're a colonizer." Incredible dissection of Drake's characters and tendencies, and it's insane because of all the new songs that Drake just released with this comeback, all of the features were from Atlanta artists. He had a song with Latto and a song with 21 Savage and Young Thug. Now, the Young Thug and 21 Savage song is where things get interesting, and we'll jump into that in just a second, but what's also interesting is the fact that he actually featured Latto on one of these records, because she's known to have a very public beef with Nicki Minaj, who came up at the same time on the same label as Drake, both of them being signed to and put on by Lil Wayne. And before this beef even started, Drake actually made an appearance at a Nicki Minaj show in Toronto.
Let's go. Hey, it's been too long. Make some noise for the king, Toronto.
And I think this was like the night before he dropped Push Ups, which was the track that really kicked off this entire beef. And he said to the crowd that night while he performed with Nicki Minaj, he was like, "Don't worry, Toronto, you know what I gotta do." So it's weird that months later he would show this sort of allegiance to one of Nicki Minaj's ops when he was standing right there with her just a couple months ago, right before this beef even started. But there are rumors that he might be dating Latto's sisters, so that's possibly why the two collaborated. And Latto's dating 21 Savage, allegedly. So considering how close Drake is to 21, it makes sense that he would give 21's girlfriend a quick verse on one of his records. But there's nothing else that's too interesting in my opinion about this Latto track. It kind of sounds like a cheap version of a Rich Baby Daddy or In My Feelings. I don't see this gaining real traction. But the song that I do want to touch on for several different reasons is the song It's Up featuring 21 Savage and Young Thug. Now, these are two of the rappers that Kendrick mentioned by name on Not Like Us when he called Drake a colonizer of their sound. And it's kind of funny to me that Drake is doing exactly what Kendrick said on that record by, quote unquote, running to Atlanta when you need a few dollars. Because again, he's dropped like 10 records since Not Like Us came out. He's dropped a bunch of pop music. He's dropped house music, tracks with Sexy Red, Camila Cabello. Nothing sticks except for this one song with 21 Savage and Young Thug. This sounds like the best effort we've received from Drake since this whole beef started. But of course, he had to run to Atlanta to get this hit on his hands. Side note, as I'm recording this video, Nicki Minaj actually just came out and dissed Drake, calling Latto Ugly Girl and calling Drake and Party Next Door Ugly Boy 1 and Ugly Boy 2. Almost as scathing of a diss as the record she released against Megan Thee Stallion earlier this year. But let's get back to this 21 and Young Thug record, because the chorus goes, "I don't care about my ops," and it seems like this entire track is kind of subliminally dedicated to anyone that they're currently beefing with. There's been rumors that 21 Savage is out dissing Kendrick, and there's rumors that Drake is dissing A$AP Rocky and kind of just grouping all his ops together within this record. So let's touch on some of these bars. Drake raps, "You guys are overprotective of women. I'm already over the next one. These guys are trying to send a message. Well, leave that stuff down at the reception." Now, we know that a lot of these issues that Drake has with, basically the entire rap game stem from women. Drake and Future are beefing over a girl. Drake and Metro are beefing over a girl. Drake and Rick Ross are beefing. He flies out Rick Ross's ex-girlfriend to one of his shows. Drake is known to have dated A$AP Rocky's wife, Rihanna. They were beefing over her. Drake and The Weeknd were beefing over Bella Hadid. Like, the list just keeps going on. So in this line, he's basically saying, like, all these other rappers are just overprotective and worrying about these women, but meanwhile Drake is just kind of sliding through them. He's already on to the next one. The first line of Drake's verse could also potentially be a shot at Kodak Black. This is a beef that fell under the radar. Drake and Kodak Black have been kind of not getting along for a good 2 years now. I believe it started when Kodak Black called out Drake for doing an album with 21 when he promised Kodak that he would do an album with him, and then he kind of gone a little back and forth with 21 as well. I'm going to do a little more research on that. Leave a comment if you guys want a full breakdown of the beef between Kodak and Drake. I know Kodak was also beefing with a local Toronto rapper, Pressa, who is also affiliated with Drake. So they didn't get along, and recently they were both at the same club in Houston called Camp, and they seem to be sitting at different sides or opposite sides of the club. And the first few bars in the Drake verse start off by him rapping, "I told the promoter tonight, put me across from their section. We don't play patty cake. They just be letting us in. We don't do the inspection." Kodak has a song called Patty Cake, and here Drake could kind of just be putting Kodak at a lower level than him, saying that he could easily get into the club, no problem, just based off his name alone. Meanwhile, Kodak has to go through all the inspection. That could possibly be due to his legal trouble or just because he's a lower level artist than Drake. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because I think he's definitely taking a shot at A$AP Rocky on the final verse of this track. Drake raps, "Knocking off the name brand guys in your crew. Heard you miss your dog, now it's Long Live Who." So if you guys didn't know, A$AP Rocky's first album was called Long Live A$AP, and his entire crew all used the moniker A$AP in their names. He had A$AP Ferg, A$AP Nasty, A$AP 12E, A$AP Yams. Recently, Ferg dropped the A$AP from his name, so when Drake says knocking off the name brand guys in your crew, he could be referencing the fact that guys like A$AP Ferg are leaving the collective, as well A$AP Yams, the founder of the A$AP collective, also passed away. So when Drake says, "Heard you miss your dogs, now it's Long Live Who," he could be referencing the guys who left the collective, aka the guys who knocked the brand name off their name, but also the deceased members of the collective. And when he says now it's Long Live Who, he could be saying, Rocky's next up. Obviously not literally, but Rocky is slated to drop his next album in a couple weeks and is rumored to have a couple disses aimed at Drake on that album. So this could be a warning shot. Drake basically telling him, like, if you diss me, you'll end up dead, pretty much. Now, I guess Drake was smart enough not to diss Kendrick directly on this record. However, it did seem like 21 Savage was kind of indirectly going at Kendrick. He rapped, "Made a couple songs, think he hot now. hit his ass up, he think he Pac now. He's referencing the famous Tupac diss song, Hit 'Em Up, but on a deeper level, Tupac was a very big part of this entire beef. Drake dropped an entire diss track against Kendrick using Tupac AI vocals. Tupac's estate threatened to sue Drake over that. Kendrick makes multiple Tupac references in his diss tracks, basically saying that Tupac is probably rolling in his grave at the thought of Drake acquiring his $1 million ring. And Drake fans have been saying that Kendrick only really made a comeback in the mainstream by dissing Drake. So 21 here is saying, made a couple songs, think he hot now, as in like Kendrick dissed Drake on a couple records. Now he thinks he's hot just because those songs hit #1, but it was really off the strength of Drake's name. Then he says think he Pac now, and Kendrick has often been compared to, thought of, and likely aspired to be the successor to Tupac. Now, DJ Academics did come out and say that 21 Savage's manager confirmed to him that these were not Kendrick disses, since Kendrick does have more than just a couple hot songs. But he also says, I moved to LA, I'm a Clipper. Drake also mentions that he could vacation wherever he wants because he doesn't care where his ops are at. A big part of the aftermath of this beef was a lot of TDE artists that were affiliated with Kendrick having trouble coming into Toronto. So Drake is kind of basically saying like he could go to Kendrick City, but Kendrick might have trouble going to his. So they could have their managers deny it all they want, but it is what it is. Like they knew what they were doing with these bars. Now, some other even more interesting references that Drake makes to this entire beef come on the song Blue Green Red, where in the first and second verse of this record, Drake starts them off by rapping, please ring my mother and tell her, and please ring my father and tell him. And if I gotta jog your guys' memory, in one of the most legendary moves we've ever seen in a rap battle, 30 minutes after Drake dropped his Kendrick Lamar diss track Family Matters, Kendrick comes back with his track Meet the Grams, where he's basically writing letters to every member of Drake's family, his father, his son, his mother, his secret daughter who may or may not exist. So these lines like please ring my mother and tell her, that could kind of be a callback to that diss track. As in Meet the Grams, Kendrick is writing to Drake's family members and telling them about the type of character Drake is, the pitfalls that he's had. And here Drake is saying, please ring my mother and tell her the shape that I'm in. 30 days I've been sober, now I'm back to drinking again. The sober bar could also be a reference to Kendrick's song Mother I Sober, which Drake also referenced in his diss record, The Hard Part 6, where he said that Kendrick's only calling him a PDF file due to past trauma that he's faced in his life with his own mother and the assault that she thought Kendrick had went through. Kendrick also accused Drake of being an alcoholic, and Drake is kind of opening up to that in this record by saying that, he's been sober 30 days, now he's back to drinking again. Then he proceeds to rap, I got away from the city, I'm on the outskirts of town. Friends that I treated like family, they were just hanging around. This could be a literal reference to Toronto since he had some violent altercations occurring outside of his house after this whole beef, but could also be a metaphor to the rap game as he's saying, I got away from the city, I'm on the outskirts of town. Basically, like after this beef ensued, he kind of took a step back from rap. He focused on making, more pop records because the friends that he treated like family, they were just hanging around. Like all the rappers that he was once very good friends with, Future, Rick Ross, The Weeknd, like they all kind of switched up on him, forcing him to take a step back from rap. And funny enough, this song isn't even really a rap song, it's more of like a dancehall track. He kind of references Kendrick's Meet the Gram diss track again in the second verse when he says, please ring my father and tell him I found some fortune and fame. They're going to try and behead me, speak on the family name. Obviously, the track is called Meet the Grams. Kendrick is speaking directly to and about all of Drake's family members. This could all be a reach, but he also rapped, he said, my knife's in my pocket, I'm in the center of town. I tapped the side of his pocket, he wasn't joking around. Possibly referencing the fact that Kendrick said, if you take it there, I'm taking it further. That's something you don't want to do. Or don't tell no lies about me, I won't tell truths about you. Drake is saying here, like someone said, their knife's in their pocket, and he tapped the side of that pocket and realized they weren't joking around. Again, could be a reach, but could be him kind of reflecting on this beef. Like, maybe he didn't think Kendrick was actually cut out for it. But when he touched the side of his pocket, when he tried to go for that knife, he realized Kendrick, wasn't joking around. Again, could be a reach. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. All in all, I would say the best effort Drake has made towards a comeback so far would be this Blue Green Red record and the It's Up record with 21 Savage and Young Thug. I think these are solid tracks. The energy he's coming with is strong. He kind of sounds hungry again. He's been using this very monotone delivery and vocal inflection in a lot of his records for the last couple years, and it sounds like here he's trying to rap with a little more life in him. He's switching up the flows. He has some great wordplay, especially when he raps, I can't sleep at night with Thug at Cobb County Corrections. I think he did enough reflecting. I think my brother learned his lesson. It's all just part of a game. We gotta all roll with protection. And just like the judge, the hammers come out for objections. Great double entendre where he's comparing a judge banging their gavel to Thug and his crew banging their hammers or their firearms if anyone objects to them or, for their own protection. Saying that, he's locked up up right now because he was trying to protect himself, and he's done enough reflecting on the situation to now be released. So yeah, definitely decent records. I don't necessarily see how these are going to serve as strong comebacks for Drake, regardless of how good they are. If they're not on streaming platforms, people will eventually forget about them, especially with an audience like Drake's fan base, whose attention spans are likely very small. If they could only bump this track off Instagram, it's going to get a lot less plays than it would if it was on all streaming platforms like Apple Music and Spotify. But aside from these 3 records that he officially released, he also shared recordings of multiple studio sessions where he previews unreleased music from his Views,
I group DM my exes. I tell them they belong to me. That goes on for forever.
Scorpion,
Hit them up, then I scared to die. Just to fit the house, man, I had to cop a feel like to the die. Voila.
and Certified Lover Boy eras.
I'm a north side rapper, the court side stepper. Still getting bank over 26 letters.
See, attached to the Instagram where he debuted these 3 songs, he also shared a link to a website called 100gigs.com, which contains multiple files from different eras within Drake's career. We're going to touch on all the content within that website, but first there's some interesting and funny things to touch on the fake Instagram account that Drake premiered these songs on. First is a picture of a bunch of boxes which has the words "No One Likes Us" printed on them, along with the words Euro 2024, which could be implying that Drake is potentially going on a European tour this year. He hasn't been to Europe in over 5 years, and "No One Likes Us" is obviously in reference to the beef with Kendrick Lamar and the 20 other rappers that he was beefing with, as, you know, no one really likes Drake within the industry now, and obviously Kendrick's massive diss record that put the nail in the coffin for Drake was called Not Like Us. That's an interesting one. He also seemed to take a shot at J. Cole, where he put up a tweet that said, remember when J. Cole got his phone stolen out of his pocket by a fan and they called Jay-Z from it, but he wasn't answering, so they called from their own phone and he picked up, basically implying that, you know, Jay-Z doesn't really care about J. Cole, even though he signed him. And I was actually thinking of doing a video on this because their dynamic is very interesting. Jay-Z signed J. Cole, but we haven't really seen the two collaborate or be seen together very often. J. Cole has rapped about how hard it was to get his masters back from Jay-Z, and Cole was never really taken under Jay's wing the same way a guy like Kanye West was. Not that there was ever necessarily beef between the two, but this picture that Drake put up is basically implying that, you know, Jay-Z didn't really care about J. Cole the way he might have cared about other artists that he mentored. And for some backstory, J. Cole and Drake teamed up on the song First Person Shooter, where they were talking about the Big Three, which is what inspired Kendrick Lamar to say F the Big Three, it's just Big Me, which basically kicked off this entire beef. J. Cole and Drake were also on tour together, right as Kendrick said F the Big Three, and J. Cole was the first person to come out and diss Kendrick, but then apologized like 2 days later. And Drake didn't seem to take too kindly to this, rapping like, you know, Cole is losing sleep on this, but it ain't me, and Kendrick wants J. Cole to stay out of the light, and he doesn't care what J. Cole thinks, cause in Drake's eyes, all of Kendrick's disses were weak. He also shared a photo kind of referencing his father's absence in his life, which is another thing that Kendrick called Drake out for, by posting a meme saying, my father was never home, he was always drinking booze. He saw a sign saying drink Canada dry, so he went up there. Another very interesting photo that Drake shared was a document from 2008 showing Drake being booked for a recording session in LA. On that document, you see this guy's name, Wendell Cage, who used to be the project coordinator for Aftermath, which is Dr. Dre's label. He was basically responsible for being the liaison between artists on the Aftermath label and other artists, coordinating their flights, etc. And why this is significant is because obviously Dr. Dre was the one who kicked off the intro to Kendrick performing his Not Like Us diss record 5 times at his LA pop-up concert.
I see dead people.
And Drake here is kind of emphasizing that, you know, way before Kendrick was even around, Drake used to write for Dr. Dre, and even Lil Wayne mentioned this in a 2009 record called Ransom, where he said, me and Drizzy both wrote on Detox, which is the name of Dr. Dre's, you know, famously scrapped album, probably the most anticipated rap album of all time. Alright guys, now let's dive into where it really gets interesting, because again, Drake shared a link to a website that contained dozens of gigabytes worth of files that documented basically Drake's entire career. It's important to note that he was marketing it as 100 gigs on your head top, but this is not 100 gigabytes, which kind of implies that there's going to be more footage or music or content that is going to be updated on this website in the future. But in the meantime, we got tons of videos from different eras, unreleased records, different versions of records. He gave us footage all the way back to like 2010 when he was performing with Lil Wayne, recording Thank Me Later in the studio, or 2008 footage of him recording a demo version of one of his first hits, November 18th. There's footage of basically every era of Drake. In the folder 6, man, you have footage of him in the studio working on If You're Reading This, It's Too Late, which could be my favorite Drake project, so it was great to see some of this behind the scenes footage. 40 Clear clears up the age-old rumor of if Drake was saying should or shit on his record Know Yourself, where he says, you know how that should go, as he was on the phone trying to clear up whether or not they need to censor that word out, even though Drake is saying should, but, it doesn't really sound like he's saying should. Funny enough, even all the way in 2015, Drake was still in the studio with a BlackBerry, which is what he was known to write his raps on very early on in his career. Speaking of early on in his career, there's tons of footage of Drake practicing for old tours that he was on. Tours like the Club Paradise show where he brought his former friends Kendrick and A$AP Rocky to open up for him, or even footage of him performing with The Weeknd. There's a whole 12-minute set of him performing with Future. There's even footage of him performing with Rihanna, emphasizing that it was a lot of the artists that were once closest to Drake that have now turned on him and are no longer in his corner. Some other interesting footage includes some behind-the-scenes work Drake was doing on his album Honestly Nevermind. He appears to show the track list of that album in its early stages, which seemed to feature Metro Boomin's song Trance. That song was supposed to be the 6th record off of Drake's Honestly Nevermind album, but actually ended up on Metro Boomin's album Heroes and Villains, where he purposely left Drake's verse off the record. And that was the first sign that the public got that Drake and Metro Boomin were actually beefing. Metro actually commented on this when the album was released by saying he really wanted to get on that song, but I was just letting him know that it was really just done for real. I was already just set on how it was. I was like, bro, I'm not trying to sell you no dream. I'm locked in on where it was. He did some stuff. A couple parts was cool, but I just felt like even with Young Thug's verse and Travis' verse and the outro, there just wasn't any room. It was nothing personal. I just ended up using the original, and I guess the other one just leaked or something. That's in reference to Drake's version of the track Leaking, and many people thought that Drake actually leaked the record himself, and he does say the lines Honestly Nevermind on his verse on that record, showing that, this song very well may have been intended to be on Drake's album initially. But yeah, there's hours and hours of footage of Drake in the studio. Some very cool footage of Drake and Boy Wonder kind of just vibing out listening to beats, where Drake is just kind of sitting there with a pencil and paper. No one in the room is really talking. They're just kind of vibing to the beat, and it's cool to see that perspective of how Drake and Boy Wonder potentially develop their creative process for making records. There's also a funny clip of Drake having a phone call with his mother where he's playing her the song Too Good. Funny enough, that song features Rihanna, which was a woman that Drake was obviously involved with at one point, but during that phone call, he's telling his mom that the song was actually written for Serena Williams. And throughout this footage, he reveals kind of little tidbits about his creative process. He's telling his mom how when he writes a song about a woman, he usually makes that song sound like a song that they would actually appreciate or sound like something they would listen to on their own.
Not gonna get heavily into things.
I get heavy on a couple joints, but this is more about me and Serena, so I
gathered that.
When I make songs about women, I also make songs for them. If I'm gonna talk about them, I'll at least do them the justice of making them a song that they like. I know Serena, and I know that she'll hear it loud and clear, but she'll also not hate me for it because it's lighthearted.
And she is seeing someone else.
I don't know, Mom.
But speaking on Rihanna, there's also some weird stuff related to her within this footage. There's footage of them performing the song Take Care together. There's footage of him in a studio with a Rihanna t-shirt on. There's an entire folder on this website called Barbados, which is Rihanna's hometown. There's a video of Drake playing an unfinished version of his song Effin' Fans in Barbados, which is a song he wrote about Rihanna. There's tons and tons of unreleased versions of different songs he did for his album Views. There's a really good early version of his song One Dance.
I'm not like you, but baby, I like your style.
As well as his record You With Me.
What these just want from a on some DMX. I group DM my exes. I tell them they belong to me, that goes on for forever.
Tons of unreleased records from his album CLB. I'll leave a link in the description of a Twitter thread that features all the unreleased records Drake previewed on this website. But to me, by far, the best unreleased record that he previewed has to be his demo version of Kanye West's song Yikes. See, that was originally a Drake record, and the tone he's using, the beat he's using, the flows he's using in his demo version of that song sound, in my opinion, way better than the final version we got on Kanye's album Ye. The song is about being menacing, frightening, and it actually sounds like it embodies it on the Drake demo, whereas Kanye's version kind of just sounds like he's doing his best Drake impression. And he's showing you here that as much flack as we want to give Drake for using reference tracks, he's also capable of making amazing reference tracks for other artists, some of our favorite artists, and sometimes those reference tracks sound even better than the artist's final version. But speaking of reference tracks, it also seems like a lot of this footage is meant to show the world how Drake actually writes his records. See, Drake has been getting a lot of hate lately, especially after this Kendrick Lamar beef, for using ghostwriters and reference tracks. A lot of them have leaked lately. The worst one being his Mob Ties reference track that leaked, because that was supposed to be a record that was specifically in reference to his whole beef with Kanye and Pusha T. And we come to find out that most of the flows, cadences, and even the lyrics in that song were not actually written by Drake. So I think showing a lot of these behind the scenes studio footage videos is Drake's way of kind of doing damage control and showing the world, like, look, like, I really write. I'm really involved in the writing process of a lot of my records. There's a lot of footage showing him on a phone in a studio writing songs for views. Obviously him writing the record Yikes for Kanye West, the creation of the song Hotline Bling, but of course he's not going to show where he got the beat for that record. I'll save that story for another video. Comment if you want that. But it was kind of interesting to see how he created that record. We'll touch on that in a minute, but it also is funny to note that if you watch the studio footage of Drake, you know, between like, I guess you could say 2008 all the way up until like 2016, he seemed to be having a lot more fun with it. He was recording records for Take Care in like a makeshift studio in a hotel. He was cracking jokes with 40 and all the other guys who were in the studio with him. With Hotline Bling, you just have the song repeating over and over again, and Drake's cracking jokes and kind of talking to the people around him. But once you get into the footage from the Honestly Nevermind days or even the Certified Lover Boy days, the vibes seem kind of different. They seem darker. No one's really talking as much in the studio. No one's cracking jokes. They're kind of just all like in a dark room listening to beats. There's a video of Drake listening to Overdrive, his song off Honestly Nevermind, and he genuinely looks depressed within that video. Almost as if this has become like some sort of mundane, formulaic process or job for him, rather than the creative, carefree, fun approach that he seemed to be taking in the footage from earlier studio sessions during the beginning eras of his career. In my opinion, Drake's musical integrity kind of diminished after his album Views. It seemed like he was putting a lot less care into the music. It was a lot more formulaic. There was a lot less passion within the bars, melodies, hooks that he was delivering, and it's kind of apparent by the studio footage. Again, it looks a lot more lifeless in the videos from the more recent years. And I think if he truly wants to make a comeback here, he has to go back to that approach that he took in the beginning of his career, where he was putting a lot more care into the craft, putting a lot more thought into the subject matter of his music, and kind of trying new flows, new sounds, new things. But anyways, there's some interesting footage of him recording Hotline Bling. He was saying that the name of the song actually derived from this girl that he used to sleep with. Every time they were in bed together, her phone would just be going off the hook, and he actually had her name in his phone as Hotline Bling. And he was just saying like that's the perfect name. Like if he was a dancehall artist, he would call himself Hotline Bling. He also wanted to put Future on the record at one point. I can't really hear Future on Hotline Bling, but let me know in the comments what you guys think. There's also again footage of him on his phone kind of typing up what seems to be the lyrics of the next verse for Hotline Bling as he's listening to the beat on repeat. And he does a lot of foreshadowing here. He's telling all the guys in the studio that like this song needs to drop in the summer. That was summer of 2015. That's when he dropped that record. And he was saying like that would be the song of the summer whenever it drops. And it really did go on to become one of the songs of the summer of that year, 100%. It almost actually got Drake his first #1 on the charts, but he lost that placement due to a song by The Weeknd actually taking its place. You also have tons of footage of him talking about reference tracks, showing that he's the one who also creates reference tracks. It's not just his ghostwriters. There's footage of him recording Middle of the Ocean off Her Loss and going back and changing some of the words of the record. There's also an unreleased track called Courtside Steppers from the CLB era, where Drake is heard mumbling over the beat, showing that, you know, sometimes he is the one writing the record and he's just kind of mumbling and then comes in and replaces the words afterwards. There's also footage of him and Lil Yachty in the studio listening to his album Her Loss, and while he's talking to Yachty in that footage, he's kind of comparing Yachty's new experimental artsy style of him like trying new things with songs like Poland to when Lil Wayne, Drake's mentor, dropping his song I Feel Like Dying and started tapping into a whole new sound that we kind of never really heard before from any rapper. He was telling Yachty like, it's like you're trying a bunch of new stuff and it's just all good. And I think with Drake's new rollout, ultimately that's the same thing he's trying to do right now. His strategy is just, you know, try a bunch of new things, see what sticks, see what people think is good, and just kind of have fun with it, right? I mean, the fact that we're only seeing all of this old footage now shows how tight-knit Drake's camp has been throughout his entire career. And I think giving it to his fans now is his way of kind of getting personal with his audience, showing us a side of his life and him and his recording process that we've never really seen before. And peeling back the curtain like this is kind of a smart move, right? Because he just dropped hours and hours worth of footage, whether it was studio time, tours of his plane, videos of him on tour, videos of him in the studio early on or recently, old music, new music, unreleased music. You're getting a side of Drake that, again, we've never really seen before. And it's also going to get the people talking, reposting all this content and discussing their favorite or most hated Drake eras or things that they never knew about Drake. And this discussion about him is happening without him even having to say a word. He's just dropping a bunch of footage and letting the people do the talking. I always said with his next album, if he really wants to make a significant comeback after the loss that he took, then he needs to get more personal on his records. And I don't think he's necessarily doing that with the new records that he dropped, but by dropping all this unreleased content and studio footage, he is kind of getting personal in a way that a lot of other artists haven't really ever done in their career. He just gave us like 5 documentaries worth of footage of him creating all of his biggest albums, documenting his whole entire career. And again, it just forces people to have to discuss him whether they like it or not. And beyond the new records he released, this really gives fans and haters a glimpse into the artist that Drake is, how he creates his music, how he rehearses for his tours, how he lives his day to day. Kendrick was claiming that Drake suffers from an identity crisis, but Drake is basically handing you his entire identity, his entire life on a silver platter within this website, within all these files. And it's a little bit of a cryptic way, but also a very interesting way to do it. And it kind of leaves you wondering, is this Drake hinting at retirement, or is this Drake kind of like wiping the slate clean and starting an entirely new era? Like, he's dumping basically his entire career on this website. It's almost like a biography that someone would write about themselves once their career is over. It's kind of like him looking back on all the good times instead of focusing on, creating new memories. But again, this could also just be him wiping the slate clean, kind of trying to prove to the world that, he really does write his raps. He really is in the studio with that BlackBerry, typing up things to different Boy Wonder beats. Maybe it's his way of saying, none of the records I've released since I took that loss to Kendrick have really been connecting with the public. So I'm just going to go back to giving you guys footage of eras that I know connected with the public. That way you guys can remember what you know and love me for. And as for right now, we know that he's working on an album with Party Next Door. I could imagine he's not going to completely leave hip-hop as he's, back to dropping hip-hop records with Atlanta artists. But given these weird rollouts, these weird ways of releasing music, this weird mystique that Drake has been carrying since taking that loss to Kendrick, it should very much leave you wondering, where does Drake go from here? Where does he want to go from here? Is he confused, or is this all part of, some sort of calculated plan? God's plan, if you will. Let me know in the comments, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.